Welcome to the fourth video on the sixth meditation. So in the last videos, we've seen that we can be sure that there is a corporeal world of extended physical things, but also that we can't trust our senses to tell us exactly what this world is like. Although we can trust that if there's a difference in our sensory ideas, well, then that's going to correspond to a difference in the causes of those sensory ideas. So if I perceive green and perceive red, well, then there's a difference in the things out there in the world that cause those ideas of red and green, even if those things themselves are not red or green. And given that we have these sensory ideas, but we can't trust that the world is exactly like those ideas, we might wonder, well, why not, right? And what can and what can't we trust about our sensory ideas? I mean, after all, right? It seems like given that we can't trust these sensory ideas, we're in a way in a bind, right? I mean, the intellect is the faculty of representation. And since the intellect is perfect, as we saw in meditation 3, it can't go wrong. Thus, it seems at least all of the representations of the intellect that aren't created by me through an act of my will should be clear and distinct, right? I mean, if the intellect is perfect and I didn't create the ideas and they didn't come from a finite, fallible thing like me, well, then why aren't they clear and distinct? Nonetheless, my sensory ideas are not clear and distinct, right? They're obscure and confused. And so how is this possible? I mean, it doesn't seem possible. After all, God is good and I'm perfect in my kind. Well, to answer this, we have to see what sensory ideas do for us. And at this point, I mean, we've seen that I can know clearly and distinctly that I'm a human being, and that this includes both a mind and a body. And so the question is, well, what is the relationship between me as a mind and me as a mind-body composite? Well, Descartes gets at his answer to this in this passage here on page 118. He says, for the proper purpose of the sensory perceptions given me by nature is simply, so the proper purpose, they're going to have a purpose, given me by nature is simply to inform my mind of what is beneficial or harmful for the composite of which the mind is part, right? So the mind-body composite, this animal being, this rational animal. And to this extent, they're sufficiently clear and distinct. But I misuse them by treating them as reliable touchstones for immediate judgments about the essential nature of the bodies located outside us. Yet this is an area where they provide only very obscure information. So the idea is, well, these sensory ideas, they're going to be sufficiently clear and distinct for showing me what's beneficial or harmful to my body and my mind together, right? This composite being. But I misuse sensory ideas by treating them as reliable touchstones for the nature or essence of the bodies located outside me, right? So for what the wax itself is. So that's just not what sensory ideas are for. They're not for telling me the truth of things. They're for telling me what's beneficial or harmful. Let me move down here to this chart. So in this chart, I've laid out a comparison between myself as a mind only, as a thinking thing, me in the precise sense, right? So that's what we've been looking at so far. and myself as a mind-body composite, as a thing that's both a thinking thing and a bodily thing. And what he was saying in that last paragraph is that the truth about bodies is given by mathematics and physics, not by the senses, right? I mean, that's what we saw at the end of the proof of the external world, that we can trust the truths of mathematics and physics, but we can't trust what the senses tell us. The senses don't give us the truth of things, but they just help us orient our lives. That's the idea. Well, why? I mean, how do we establish a truth? Well, there are two cases. There are two ways that we establish a truth. I understand I am, I exist. I understand I am, I exist. That was one way in which we established a truth, right? When I entertain the idea I am, I exist clearly and distinctly, I cannot but affirm it as true. Or when I understand 2 and 3 and 5, well, I cannot but affirm 2 plus 3 equals 5, right? It's obvious. I just see it. And this gets called intuition. So that's one way in which I get to knowledge of truths. But another way, the way that we saw in, say, the proof of God's existence, is through proof or demonstration. And a proof or demonstration is going to be a series of judgments, each of which is evident given the last. And the starting points for these proofs or demonstrations will be intuitions. And each step will take us to something as obvious as the things that came before it. So the intuitions will be clear and distinct. They'll be completely obvious. You'll just see them. And each step in the proof will take you to a new thought that's just as obvious as the thing that came before it. And each of these new thoughts will make it evident that things are so. And so everything that we reach in this way will also be true, will also be clear and distinct. If, however, we don't rely on intuition and proof, right, in life, so in life, we're not always going to be able to see things clearly and distinctly. Rather, we're going to rely on experience. So suppose we're in the rainforest, for example, and we encounter a banana for the first time. It smells pretty good, but we can only establish whether it's food or not, whether it's food or poison, by trying it. And in general, the senses seem to provide us with pretty reliable information about what's going on with our bodies, whether something is going to be food for it or poison to it. So they tell us what's going to be good for the body and what will be bad for the body. And so my faculties of my mind-body composite, my senses, are going to be good for the conduct of life, but they're not going to be good for getting me on knowledge of truth, right? And so as we saw when considering, when I saw what the meditator saw when considering herself as a thinking thing only, well, there were two faculties, right? An intellect and a will. That's what we saw in meditation 4. And these faculties had characteristic operations. The intellect characteristic operation was having clear and distinct perceptions, like my intuition of I understand I exist, or my proof of God's existence. And judging, taking things to be the case or not being the case, saying yes or no, or desiring truth. And we saw that these faculties cooperated whenever I had knowledge of truth. And similarly, now we're seeing over when I consider my mind-body composite, my animal nature, I have two faculties, a faculty for sensibility and a faculty for appetite. And this faculty for sensibility, for getting these sensory ideas, is my faculty for sensing or feeling pleasure. And that's going to give me sensations like that of colors, like red or green, or smells, like the sweet smell of the wax, or pain, like when I reach out and touch the fire. And those sensory ideas, well, those give rise to desires, you know, for the good smelling things, or to get away from the painful things, right? And so here, when considering my mind-body composite, we can also see sensibility and appetite cooperating together. The one giving me sensations and pleasures, the other giving rise to desires or volitional representations, things that move me. And while my faculty is considered only as a thinking thing, my faculties of intellectual will are for the pursuit of the knowledge of truth. These faculties, my faculties of sensibility and appetite, they coordinate and cooperate in the conduct of life. So they're for helping me get around and achieve the things that I want to achieve to help me survive, right? Okay, and so that's a little bit about me as a mind-body composite, and the nature of my sensory ideas and what their purpose is. In the next video, we'll turn to how exactly I can have these ideas, and these ideas can lead me away from the knowledge of truth, and yet I can still be a thinking thing because they still help me in the conduct of life, and I'm better for it.